everybody, and welcome back to the Dynasty Slant, PFF's fantasy podcast focused on Dynasty and Keeper Leagues. I'm Scott Spratt, and I'm joined by Michael Moore. And off a really good weekend of NFC and AFC championship games, there's probably a lot that I could mention right now that would be a lot of fun and probably some funny stuff. But I actually wanted to take the top of today's show to just congratulate you, Michael, for being nominated for the Best Football Series by the Fantasy Sports Writers Association for your Player Showdown articles. That's a really big deal, man. Congratulations.
Thanks. I'm still not convinced that they didn't make a mistake or something, and because it's such a common name that I have that they accidentally put someone else in there. But anyway, I'll take it. It's very nice, and obviously, it's pretty cool to be mentioned with those other guys nominated. So.
Yeah, my ploy to be Schmatcliffe didn't really work out for me, but at least we'll have one nomination for the show. You can't really take that away from
right, yeah. No, I'm representing, the Dynasty Slant. That's what I'm doing.
And I appreciate that, because you got to carry us. All right, let's get started then with today's Topic 6.
Oh my God, it's picked off!
Topic 6.
Okay, Michael, kind of like we did 2 weeks ago with our show, I wanted to focus a lot of today's topics on the games that we saw over, actually we're going to do the last 2 weekends since we haven't been here, so both in the divisional and the championship rounds. This will again be focused on Dynasty and Keeper League angles, but talking about the players that we just saw play. And I think the natural place to start is with Rob Gronkowski, who unfortunately suffered another injury, this one being a concussion in the AFC title game. And this is kind of something that you brought up a few weeks ago, Michael, when you tweeted out who you wanted to get people's opinions on who they thought the number one Dynasty tight end was. At the time, your poll had a pretty even split with Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce. I wanted to ask you where you were comfortable ranking Gronk given this latest injury for him.
Well, I'm still ranking Gronk number one, but it's like by a hair at this point. It's very, very close because like you mentioned, he had a concussion. That's obviously a pretty major injury. And, who knows if he's going to play in the Super Bowl. I mean, at least it's enough time for him to recover before next season. But as you've sort of alluded to, he's pretty injury prone. So that has to factor in when you're talking about the top tight end there.
Yeah, injury prone, that may not even do it full justice.
Right.
Trying to come up with this, I started to look in to find every injury I could that Gronk has suffered in his career. And here's everything I came up with. Back in 2009, when he was still in college, a junior at Arizona, he had a bulging disc in his back. In 2011, then with the Patriots, suffered an ankle sprain in the AFC title game, and he played through it in the Super Bowl, but you may remember that he wasn't really at 100% there. 2012, he broke his forearm and missed 5 games. 2013, he fractured a vertebra in his back, missed the preseason and then 6 regular season games, and then later in the year tore his ACL and MCL. And even suffered a concussion, too, in that same hit. Missed 9 games. Injured a knee in 2015 and missed a game. 2016, injured a hamstring, missed 2 games. 2016, injured his chest and missed a game. 2016 as well, injured his back, missed 5 games in the playoffs. And then in 2017, injured his thigh earlier this year, missed a game, and then suffered this concussion in the AFC title game. That's basically 1 major injury on average per season. That's kind of a lot, Michael. I mean, just hearing that deluge of issues, what do you think?
Well, and also just regarding his injury history, literally if you start typing Rob Gronkowski into Google, the first suggested search is Rob Gronkowski injury. To give you an idea of just how synonymous his name is with injuries. But, yes, he gets injured a lot and it's obviously some pretty serious injuries he's had. But to me, he's still just that much better than every other tight end, including Travis Kelce. I mean, for example, for PFF, using PFF's points per opportunity this year, he was still 20% ahead of Kelce with 0.36 points compared to 0.3 points in standard leagues. So, and not to mention, I think his situation, at least to me, is a little easier to predict going into next season. We know who the quarterback's going to be. I mean, yes, they're probably going to get a different offensive coordinator, but if we've learned anything, the Patriots just keep on rolling. So compared to Kelce, where who knows what's going to happen at quarterback, they lost their offensive coordinator, Nagy, to the Bears. So I don't know. I'm still going with Gronk, but believe me, if more people said Kelce than Gronk at this point, I wouldn't be too mad at that.
Because there have been so many injuries, I guess I was expecting Gronk to start showing signs of aging before Kelce and before a lot of other players at his age. And I've kind of teased you with this a couple of times, Michael, but I've been working on that expected receiving yards model. I mentioned that on the last show, for instance. And with that, actually, Gronkowski hasn't slowed down at all. He's been hovering around about 60 yards above expectations per 16 games, whereas Kelce started to show a steep decline from his peak around 60 down under 20 this season. So, I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a fluid stat, but this would definitely suggest that Gronk is more effective in not showing declines of aging the way Kelce even is, even though we don't really think of Kelce as being an injury-prone player. They're about the same age. I think Gronk is maybe 6 months older than Kelce, so there's not much of an advantage there. But I don't really see any signs in his actual play when he's on the field that Gronk is slowing down at all. And so because of that, I think I'm with you that I would be more willing to stick with Gronk as the number one guy in Dynasty. He's just so good when he's on the field.
Yeah, and look, as far as the major injury goes, it's really only been, it was 2016 when he missed half the season. But 3 out of the 4 last seasons, he's played nearly every game, which, look, there's been 1 or 2 for each season, but, you know, that could go for any player. There's only really been 1 since 2013 that he had, you know, a significant amount of time off. So, yeah, I still go with Gronk because he's just that much better, like you said, but it's very close. I mean, I can't argue with somebody that feels more comfortable with Kelce going forward.
Okay, then let's pivot over to topic number 2, which this one probably deserved to be number 1 now that I think about it, but did Nick Foles earn himself a starting job because of how well he's played, both throughout the entire playoffs, but in particular in the title game where he was 26 of 33, 352 yards and 3 touchdowns, hasn't yet turned the ball over this postseason. He's been great, helped carry the Eagles to the Super Bowl when they weren't expected to get there without Carson Wentz. So, Michael, has Foles earned himself a starting job somewhere, if not necessarily with the Eagles?
I think he's earned himself a starting job. I don't think he's earned himself a franchise job. So what I mean by that is, do I think there's going to be teams that either need a bridge for a younger quarterback or, you know, maybe an unexpected retirement soon? I think that's very possible, and Nick Foles would probably be someone that those teams would look at. I don't envision like Nick Foles starting 2 years from now. Does that make sense? Like, I think he starts next year for someone like the Browns if they go high on a quarterback, or the Broncos if they go high on a quarterback, or maybe even the Cardinals, something like that. But do I think a team is going to give him a ton of money and a long-term commitment? No. But look, he's bought himself another year or 2 as a starting quarterback, and good for him. I mean, he's played really, really well and literally played the best game of his life yesterday. So yeah, he's definitely earned a sort of reprieve from being banned by NFL teams.
But
oh no!
Can I just run through his numbers?
Right on his parade, Scott. He's going to the Super Bowl. He's starting on a Super Bowl team. Now you come along and just piss on it. Why do you do?
I mean, I don't want to take anything away from how well he's played in the postseason, but this wouldn't be the first time that we saw a player that's not that great have a really great run. I mean, Foles himself had an incredible run throughout an entire season in 2013, but I don't think we think that's who he is. And let me just run through his numbers from since 2014. So that excludes his career year in 2013. Maybe that's unfair, but since then, he's had 6.4 yards per attempt, 28 touchdowns, and 20 interceptions. Those aren't horrible numbers, but they're definitely not inspiring. I mean, really, from my perspective, I'm looking for quarterbacks to be over 7 yards per attempt. He's been pretty much right between Joe Flacco and Brock Osweiler over that stretch, which is the 5th lowest yards per attempt of the 48 quarterbacks that have at least 400 pass attempts over that stretch. So I don't think he's very good. And I think he's having a really good run through the playoffs right now. I don't really feel like he deserves to be a starting guy, you know?
Yeah, but and look, I'm not disagreeing with your assessment as far as how he's performed. I just think, you know, the NFL is I'm not going to say it's a good old boys club, but it kind of is. And I think, you know, he sort of built his name up the last couple of weeks alone that somebody is going to give him a shot. And look, for a team like the Browns or the Broncos, it's a good PR move if you signed a quarterback that played in the Super Bowl last year, right? Like that tells that can give the fans perception like, oh, we're really trying, even though people like you and I know, hey, he's not really that good. So like I said, I think he'll be a starter. That doesn't necessarily mean he'll be good as a starter or be a starter very long, but I think he's probably earned that designation going into next year.
So even if Foles gets a job, and it's just kind of hard to be specific because it would depend where he went, how good his receiving options and everything would be.
Right.
But just to kind of like generically hypothetical through this, I pulled up Jeff's early 2018 redraft rankings. He's got Ryan Tannehill at 23rd. Do you imagine you would have Foles ahead of Tannehill if he landed a job somewhere?
I would say no. I would probably take Tannehill.
Me too. He's got Mitch Trubisky at 26. How about him versus Foles?
I would probably take Trubisky.
And then finally, Flacco was his last ranked quarterback at 27.
Oh, no. Oh, Joe Flacco. Like, I want to say neither, but if I had to, I would probably take Flacco over that.
Sure. I think the general point is, even if Foles ends up getting a job, he's not going to have any fantasy relevance. If he's not getting fantasy relevance next season, then he definitely doesn't have it in dynasty formats because he's 29 years old. So I just don't see it really happening. But, if he can get in camp and try to win a starting job, he can prove us wrong, obviously. So, we'll let it play out. All right, we have another quarterback topic that you insisted, Michael. This is all you. You just absolutely had to talk about how good Blake Bortles was. And you know what? He was tremendous in their near upset of the Patriots on Sunday. By traditional statistics, he looked good with 293 yards and a touchdown on 64% completions. He didn't throw an interception in any of his 3 playoff games this season. So, yeah, played great. Do you think he played good enough to earn himself a new contract, either with the Jaguars or with another team?
I think he played well enough that Jacksonville will probably re-sign him. I don't know that they give him as much money as they would other quarterbacks, but I do think they bring him back. And look, I think he showed this year, not just during the playoffs, but this season, the key to Blake Bortles, and you've kind of mentioned to it too on our notes here, but if you, I guess, minimize the chances of Blake Bortles screwing up, then the better he is. Okay, so for example, he literally had 100 less pass attempts this year because they ran it so much more. And let's face it, they were winning more and they didn't have to pass it as much. So that was a big reason. But even so, his touchdown rate of 4%, meaning he threw a touchdown 4 times out of every 100 pass attempts, was the best of his career. His interception rate, which was 2.5%, was the best of his career. And his sack rate, which was 4.4%, was the best of his career, despite having only the 19th best pass blocking unit according to PFF. So long story short, I think if Blake Bortles is, to use a dated term, a game manager, and they run the ball more and they have a good defense, I think he's fine. So I do think he comes back next year for Jacksonville. I think they probably use some cap resources on other positions and re-sign him for next year.
Yeah, you had some good numbers there, Michael. I have a couple more that tell a very similar story to you. You might not be able to remember this, but back in 2015, Bortles was actually pretty darn good.
He was a top 10 fantasy quarterback, Scott. We all remember, believe me.
I don't think everybody remembers anymore. It's just been so hard to be Blake Bortles in the last year and a half. But that year, he had 7.3 yards per attempt. Last year, it cratered to 6.2, and this year it bounced back up to 7.0. So that kind of shows you maybe 2016 was the outlier. But the thing that really kind of hones in for me is his average depth of throw has really decreased over the last 3 years. That 2015 season, it was at 9.2 yards. Last year down to 8.0, and this year down to 7.5. That's really low. And that's kind of why this whole situation screams Alex Smith to me. And I don't actually think Bortles is as good a passer as Smith. I think Smith is actually pretty good, but this is very much a situation where the Jags managed Bortles, like you said, where they didn't have him throw deep. He threw deep a little bit in the playoffs, about a third of his passes, but he was only completing 44% of those for 8.8 yards per attempt. That's not very good. Didn't throw an interception. Again, that's great, but just the actual numbers weren't very good. And yeah, I'm sure Bortles could kind of manage a team the way that Smith managed it, where they don't take a lot of deep shots, they run the ball. But don't you think a lot of different quarterbacks in the league could do that? Guys that aren't celebrated, guys like Josh McCown and Andy Dalton, players that they're not going to earn a lot of money on the open market. To me, I guess I don't really know how much Bortles is going to command, but if it's any amount of money at all, why would you necessarily want to pay him when you could have somebody for free that you could make do the same thing, right?
Yeah, and look, I understand your point, meaning you definitely shouldn't go above and beyond to bring Blake Bortles back. Now, I will say, if it comes down to a Blake Bortles and an Andy Dalton, to me, you bring back Bortles because he's already familiar with the coaching, the system, the players, etc. So now, if he, for whatever reason, thinks he's worth more than, what we'll call a league replacement quarterback, okay, well, then we have a problem, and they probably should start looking other places. I don't think he'll do that because I think he probably figured out my best chance to succeed is back in Jacksonville too. I don't have to pass as much. They don't rely on me as much on the offense. So I think they both have an interest in re-upping for next year. And look, I mean, and you don't have to look at the numbers to know that his average depth of target has dropped. I mean, it seemed like every pass was either like a slant in or a screen yesterday. I mean, he just wasn't throwing it very far at all. And look, that's okay. If you've got good playmakers and good pass catchers on the team, that can work out. I mean, look at Corey Grant, who we'll get to in a little bit. So I think he'll come back. I don't know that the Jaguars want to necessarily, rock the boat, especially when they were so close, and they may just be literally one or two players at other positions away.
Or maybe the position they're one player away from is a quarterback.
Why are you such a Debbie Downer today, Scott? I don't get it.
I don't know. I guess I'm still in my Panthers funk. I don't know.
And you just lost your defensive coordinator, so that's even worse. You didn't know that, right? I'm not telling you anything you didn't know, right?
No, well, we're going to actually talk about that a little bit more in Gunpoint Banner, so I'll circle back to my feelings there. But
okay.
We've got a few more topics to cover here in the main part first. So let's move on to the Vikings. Unfortunately, the Vikings couldn't really put it together against the Eagles. They just had sort of their dreadful game of the year there. But Jerick McKinnon was a very effective fantasy player in that game, in part because they were playing catch-up and he's their third down back. But in particular, he had 11 catches for 86 yards and ended up having a very nice season once he kind of got worked more into the midst starting in week 5. And so I guess my question for you, Michael, is do you think McKinnon did enough through the regular season and the playoffs to earn himself a bigger job now that he's a free agent?
It's being a free agent running back seems like such a tough gig because they're just not valued very much. They're very cheap when it comes to drafting, and seemingly there's just a lot, especially the last couple of years. So do I think McKinnon's a good player? Yes. Do I think some team is going to sign him with the explicit instruction to start most of the time or take most of the snaps? Probably not. I think he's probably geared, again, more towards the role he had in Minnesota, which was, the more pass-catching back. I just don't see a team sort of turning over the keys to him. Do you?
No, I think you have it pretty much figured out there. McKinnon's pretty small at 5'9", 205 pounds. I think it's just a hard ask to give a guy like that more than 15 touches a game on average. And his profile of statistics looks very much like other third down backs. I mean, very good ones. So 15.9 tackles avoided per 100 carries this season. That's strong. 2.7 yards after contact per attempt. That's not bad, certainly, but it's not like the elite power backs that are getting that early down work. His profile looks a lot like both Giovanni Bernard and Matt Forte from this season. Again, those are really good third down backs in my mind, but not somebody that I'm ready to sign up for something like 20 to 25 touches a game.
Well, and it's such a copycat league that, with the emergence of guys like Kareem Hunt and Alvin Kamara, who are drafted not on day one, but, rounds 2, 3, and 4, I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of teams go that route again, where they either don't re-sign their veteran running backs or they cut them or whatever, and they go to the draft for their running back solution. And that leaves a guy like McKinnon out. So it's unfortunate because I think, he's had quite the roller coaster when it comes to his dynasty value from the get-go. But I just don't see him being as successful as he was this last year in Minnesota.
Yeah, and that role is certainly not one that, I'm going to use a double negative here, so sorry, can't have fantasy success. I mean, from week 5 on, I think McKinnon was a top 15 back in PPR scoring, so it's something that can really work out. But when you actually kind of get down into the ranking side of things, it gets much harder to make a case because I feel like we're kind of getting back to a flush period of running back talent right now. I pulled up again Jeff's 2018 early rankings right now, and of the players that have that role as sort of primarily a third down back, the highest ranked one in Jeff's rankings is Chris Thompson at 28. Do you like McKinnon better than you like Thompson?
No, I would take Thompson.
Me too. What about McKinnon or Duke Johnson, who's ranked 30th?
Duke Johnson.
Agreed. McKinnon or Tariq Cohen at 34?
That's pretty close to me. I'd probably take McKinnon, but again, that could very well change once he signs with somebody. So, but they're very, very close to me.
I might lean that way too. I actually think I dislike Cohen relative to Jeff's rankings. So let's grab a couple other guys here. McKinnon or Giovanni Bernard at 41?
See, and that's another one. I'd probably go McKinnon just because I think Bernard is a little safer with his role in Cincinnati. But yeah, again, that's pretty close to me.
I sneaky think Bernard is like a really, really good player, but I'm not sure he's going to get any kind of role expansion. What about McKinnon versus Theo Riddick, 46th in Jeff's rankings?
Right now, I probably go Riddick. Again, I think I just feel safer with Riddick's role in Detroit, even though it's not a huge role, than with McKinnon's at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, it can be really difficult to know because we don't know what's going to happen to McKinnon. If he comes back to the Vikings, he probably won't be ranked that high. But with the right spot, it seems like he might be peaking around the 30th running back, and maybe even a little bit higher in PPR scoring. So it's not like he doesn't have any fantasy value. I just don't think it's fair to expect him to be as productive as he was this season or land a situation where he might get 250 total touches next season. Fair?
Well, yeah, and the one thing all of those guys you mentioned have in common is they're all still with their original team, whether they are on their rookie contract still or re-signed like Bernard or Riddick. Meaning it's very difficult for a guy to switch teams or switch situations and I guess do better than he did in the situation that he was in. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes.
Yeah. So if McKinnon does move, I think that's even worse for his dynasty value for me.
Okay. I think that's fair. All right. That's one topic for each of the four teams that were in the championship round. Let's reach back for two more topics looking back at the divisional weekend. And I want to start with Pittsburgh because Le'Veon Bell is a free agent. And my question for you, Michael, is does he need to stay in Pittsburgh in order to stay the number one back in fantasy football?
You know, to me, I think he does, but maybe not for the reasons that you might think. So,
Okay.
Obviously, he's got a huge role there. He sees a ton of touches. No one can deny that. To me, if he were to sign somewhere else, it's going to be for a lot of money. And I think that whoever he signs with understands that, hey, he can handle it, and they are very happy to give him that same kind of role or that same level of attention, if you will. However, Pittsburgh's offensive line, especially this year, was very good. So, for example, they were the 9th ranked run blocking unit, according to PFF, and 15th ranked pass blocking unit. So not necessarily elite, but very good. So to me, it's not just, hey, will a team give him the touches? It's can they protect him and can they allow him to do his thing? If he goes to a team that does not have a good offensive line, they haven't done anything to improve it, to me, that is a worry as well, along with the role he's going to play. Because if he doesn't get protection, there's only so much one guy can do. I mean, don't get me wrong. He does well in space. He can make guys miss like no other. But if he's constantly seeing a lot of guys in the backfield, that to me is problematic. So I don't think he has to be in Pittsburgh to be successful. I just think the situation needs to be very similar, not just from an attention standpoint, but from a pass blocking and run blocking unit too.
I feel like it's really difficult to evaluate how good the Steelers' blocking is for Bell just because he has such an unusual waiting kind of style.
Right.
So, like, this year, Bell had 1.4 yards before contact per attempt, which was good, but not great. The leaders in that stat were guys like Todd Gurley at 2, Mark Ingram at 1.8. You know, both the Rams and Saints, those guys had really good offensive line play. We know that. They're more traditional power runners. Bell at 1.4, not quite that good, but like, is Bell the one that's creating that? Like, is he waiting for holes to open such that he's getting hit earlier, but it's kind of opening up the chances for bigger plays down the field? I'm just not totally confident with it either way. My gut instinct is that there are other situations where he could get similarly good blocking for his abilities, but the issue that really concerns me is that you've been touching on, Michael, is will another team be as willing to give him the ball that much as the Steelers have been? This season, if you add up attempts plus targets, Le'Veon Bell had 425, and the closest player to him was LaShawn McCoy at 357. There were only 8 guys with more than 300 attempts plus targets. You know, Bell's getting 43% of the Steelers' offensive opportunities, and lead backs on other teams are kind of hovering in the 32 to 35% of their team's workloads. I think Bell being as good as he is kind of pushes that work that way, but will other teams be willing to do that? I don't know. I think it's kind of become a lot more popular to have some specialization and to save players, especially as Bell has had as much workload as he had in recent seasons. I feel like he might need to stay with the Steelers to continue to get that level of work. And that's not going to drop him out of the top spot necessarily, or the top handful of spots if he goes somewhere else, but it might bring a lot of those other guys at the top closer to the mix. You know, your Kareem Hunts of the world, your Todd Gurleys of the world. So I'd really like to see him stay in Pittsburgh, Michael.
Well, hey, look, don't get me wrong. I think that would still be the top place. But I think he could do just as well other places. But obviously, like any other player, he just needs to have good players around him too.
Definitely. All right, one more topic to hit on this week, and this is going to go back to the Titans, who lost to the Patriots in the divisional round. But in that loss, rookie wide receiver Corey Davis caught a pair of touchdowns that were both, I think, quite impressive. The first one was the real standout, where he caught it one-handed as Malcolm Butler was holding his other arm back. And the other was a really nice body control play where he got both of his feet down on the left side of the end zone. Both kind of showcased a lot of the talents that I think made Davis such a high pick in the draft this season. But Davis didn't have a very good fantasy season overall this year, and the Titans have some other veteran players that they'll still be in the mix next season. So, Michael, I know we both like Davis as a long-term prospect, but how good do you think he's going to be for fantasy owners next season specifically?
He probably does not enter the wide receiver 1 territory for me, just because I don't know that he's going to see that kind of volume. But I think he definitely is going to be in the wide receiver 2 conversation for me. So, just think 12 to 25 range as far as top fantasy receivers go. It's like you said, he had a lot of injury, well, not a lot of injuries, but he had an injury this year that really took away any chance for us to see what he could do. But in the limited time he had, he was actually pretty good. So it's all going to depend on the injury. If he can fully recover from that and not have any setbacks and not get hurt again, I think they drafted him to have the passing game run through him. I think he's the clear-cut guy there next year. I think he overtakes guys like Delaney Walker, Rashard Matthews as early as next year. It's just going to be a matter of, can he stay on the field and can he be consistent? So if he does that, I think he's a definite wide receiver too for me.
Interesting. I'm glad that we actually disagree on something for a change. I'm a little bit more pessimistic about Davis making a huge impact next season specifically. Down the line, absolutely. But from my perspective, Davis's number one talent that he's bringing to the NFL is his touchdown making ability. He's 6'3", 209 pounds, so obviously a very big target. He caught 52 touchdowns in college, including 19 his senior season. So that's really what he made his bones about. He caught touchdowns on 15.7% of his catches in college. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, DeAndre Hopkins led all receivers this season with a 13.5% touchdown rate for his targets. So Davis could potentially be a top-end touchdown producer. Here's my reservation, though. The Titans actually have some guys that are quite good at scoring touchdowns, and it may not kind of jump to your mind, but Rashard Matthews is actually the primary one of those. Over the last 2 seasons, he's had 11% of his touches, of his targets become touchdowns. And, Delaney Walker's not too bad either at 7.2%. So those guys are both pretty high, 7th and 33rd of 65 qualified receivers over that stretch. I think that he may have a hard time getting up to the 8 to 10 touchdown range next season, Davis, I mean. And I feel like he's going to need that to become probably a wide receiver too, because I'm not sure there's going to be enough targets on such a run-focused team like Tennessee, Michael.
Yeah, and that's I don't mean to understate Rashard Matthews and how sneaky, good he's been.
He's super good. I wish people realized how good he was.
Right. So I guess I just think that the draft capital they put into Corey Davis, drafted him that high. I mean, he fit the overall last year. To me, he's going to have a very long leash, I guess I should say. So they're going to give him, I think, every opportunity. Now, would it be ideal if both Matthews and Davis could produce enough that they were both fantasy relevant? Sure. And look, Tennessee has a new coach next year, and Mike Vrabel. They're, and all indications are, or at least at the moment, they're going to go after an offensive coordinator with ties to Chip Kelly. So it might look similar, that offense, to what Marcus Mariota had before, which, look, he was obviously a lot better at Oregon than Mariota was this past year, I should say. So I don't know. I'm torn. I just think they're going to defer to Corey Davis next year because of the, I guess, attention and resources they put into him. But again, like you said, it's not like Rashard Matthews is a blowover or something they can blow off. I mean, he's been very good too. So I don't know. That's tough, man. I'm just going to go with the guy that was drafted much higher, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly not crazy to do so. For Dynasty owners, there's really not too much reason to worry regardless. Actually, both Rashard Matthews and Delaney Walker become free agents in 2019, so after this next season. So down the line, Davis is going to be a really, really good player. It's just really a question to me how quickly he's going to make an impact next season.
Sure. And like I said, I think ideally they have both Matthews and Davis. I mean, like, for example, Matthews was 30th this year, I think, in yards per route run, which is pretty good as far as out of 93 receivers were concerned. So, I would go Davis, but yeah, they're both pretty good. There's not much more to say to that.
I agree. All right, now let's do some gunpoint banner, Michael.
Guys.
Gunpoint banter.
All right, I'm glad you brought up Mike Vrabel because that's kind of the focus where I want to go with this topic here. And I think, I've got to update this a little bit because so much has been happening. But there, I think, have been four teams involved in a divisional round or better in the playoffs that are going to experience some coaching changes. At least that seems to be the case based on rumors and speculation. We have Patriots offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels. Looks like he's going to land the Colts head coaching job. Patriots defensive coordinator Matt Patricia is going to probably land the Lions head coaching job. Then it looks like it's official that the Panthers defensive coordinator Steve Wilks is going to become the head coach for Arizona. And then finally, you just mentioned the Titans have hired Mike Vrabel, former Texans defensive coordinator, to be their head coach.
Oh, I need to add a fifth one too, Scott.
Oh, hit me with it.
It happened in the last hour. Well, Pat Shurmur was officially named the Giants head coach.
Okay. Well, you can add him to the mix if you want. I'm not sure if you would have prepared enough for that. But
I definitely did not. So
my question for you for Gunpoint Banner is, which of those guys will have the biggest impact on a fantasy player specifically?
Well, I think the one I'm most excited about would probably be McDaniels in Indianapolis. Should he take the job, which all indications are he is. We all know his history just because of his time with the Patriots. He had a very short stint with the Broncos for about a year and a half or so. But to me, what he's done offensively with the Patriots it's been really good. I mean, he literally had a top 8 scoring offense, and every year he was offensive coordinator there, which was 9 years. Wow. I mean, that's a pretty impressive streak. And yes, you've got Brady there and you've got Belichick there. But, I mean, to have that level of consistency and to be that good consistently, there has to be something there. And I think if he goes to Indianapolis, they obviously have a talented, albeit injured all the time, quarterback in Andrew Luck. But they've still got some talented pass catchers too in Hilton. And honestly, Jack Doyle. I think Jack Doyle as a tight end dynasty prospect would be great with Josh McDaniels. So to me, it would be Indianapolis. And look, I think, they were so bad this year that they're going to hit the reset button on a lot of positions there, including on offense. They have to get some complement or just outright replacement in the running game. They need another receiver besides T.Y. Hilton. So to me, that's the team I'd be most excited about this year.
Honestly, Michael, I probably agree with you, but because we're doing Gunpoint Banner, I can't agree. So
Okay.
Let me pick Steve Wilks, my former boy of the Carolina Panthers, now Cardinals head coach. And this really isn't about him. I don't want to be critical of him because I think he's very good at what he does, which is really defensive coordination stuff. He'll probably be an excellent head coach. But the fact that Bruce Arians is no longer going to be in Arizona means you don't have him to help their offense. And Arians has been a very gifted offensive play caller and offensive coach throughout his career. And the two spots that you can really see that show up are sort of the before and afters for him with the Colts and the Cardinals. So he was the Colts offensive coordinator for 1 year. The year before he got there, the Colts passers threw for 6 yards per attempt. His first year there, 7 yards per attempt. Year after he left, back down to 6.8 yards per attempt. Then when he went to Arizona, the year before it was 5.6 yards per attempt for their quarterbacks. And then his first year, 7.5. So those big jumps were a little bit aided by some of the new quarterbacks they had in town, in particular Carson Palmer there for the Cardinals, and then Andrew Luck too for the Colts. But it seems to me like he's very pass-friendly as a coordinator and gets those guys to go down the field where you can create those big plays and touchdowns. I don't know what the offense is going to look like under Steve Wilks, but I feel like it's going to be hard to find a guy to hire that's going to be as effective at running an offense as Arians. And so I guess that's the guy that I'm going to go with there.
Yeah, and I think we should probably take a second to pour one out for Cardinals fans because, I mean, Bruce Arians was really good. I mean, if you looked at his head coaching record with Arizona and, with the Colts that 1 year, it was really good. So I'm with you. It will be interesting to see there this year.
I'm not pessimistic about the team at all. I'm almost positive they're going to have a top 5 defense and they're going to blitz like crazy. But just because you have a really good team in real life doesn't mean you're going to have a lot of fantasy success, and that's
Right.
really the angle that I'm a little bit pessimistic for the team. All right, Michael, let's close this thing out with our stashes of the week.
I'm telling you, these shares are hot. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. It's definitely a good idea. Dwayne, I get it. Now, can you get me? Have I ever lied to you? That's right. And ask around. I never do, Dwayne.
Stash of the week.
Okay, Michael, I think you might have foreshadowed who you were picking earlier in the episode for people that were listening really closely, but tell me who you have for your stash.
Well, and in full disclosure, Scott, it was your stash first, but I stole him away for various reasons. But
That's how it works, man. You can do steal whatever you want.
okay. No, I went with Corey Grant this week, the running back for the Jaguars. Obviously, had a good game yesterday, 3 catches for 59 yards against the Patriots. But, I mean, overall, he just had a really good, efficient season. I mean, he literally averaged 8 yards a carry this year on 30 carries, too. So it wasn't like, he had a super small sample size. He had a fairly decent sample size for averaging 8 yards a carry. But for those that may have thought it was a fluke, hell, he averaged 5 yards a carry last season on 32 carries. So he's been very good and very efficient when running the ball. Some other numbers on him this year, his 4.93 yards after contact per attempt was first among any running back. His 104.6 elusive rating was second amongst any running back with 30 attempts. He literally had 7 missed tackles on his 33 touches, which is pretty nuts when you think about it.
That's great.
So, with the Jaguars, obviously they've got a couple running backs there. Fournette's the lead guy. He's not going to challenge Fournette. But it's a change of pace back. He could be really good. You've got TJ Yeldon coming back next year on a super cheap deal, so I don't see him going anywhere. But you've got Chris Ivory, who they signed to that big deal a couple years ago. They could save like $3.5 million by cutting him this offseason. So that's something I fully expect them to do. And look, Corey Grant could slide right in as that sort of change of pace guy for Fournette or for Yeldon, and I think he does that. And look, it's not to say he couldn't, at his height, get to the heights of a Chris Thompson or a Gio Bernard in that sort of role on other teams. I think he's got that ceiling in Jacksonville if they give him enough touches. So for his current value right now, or his current ADP, I think he's well worth it.
Yeah, you might have sort of a picture in your head of what Grant would look like because he's a kick returner, and we think of those guys as being really, really small. But Grant's a little bit bigger than a lot of those guys. He's 5'11", 205. So that's 3 inches taller and 10 pounds heavier than Chris Thompson, just as an example. I know we kind of throw Thompson out there a lot, and he's a little bit of an outlier. But my general thought is that I think Grant probably could handle 8 to 10 touches a game if the team felt that was good for them. And I think he's just looked so effective in his limited work that they might want to work more of those swing passes and screens and stuff in the mix for him, where maybe he can get some little PPR value too, even at low volume. So, Michael, I think that's a great stash. My stash isn't quite as deep, but I think it's worth talking about, and it's Danny Amendola, wide receiver for the Patriots. Even this season without Julian Edelman in the mix, he wasn't exactly a fantasy-relevant player. The Patriots have a lot of options, and he's kind of their third guy. He may be the trusted guy. He certainly was in the championship game, but throughout the playoffs, in fact, he's performed really well with 18 catches for 196 and 2 touchdowns in the 2 games. But the thing that's really struck out to me is I'm not so sure that Edelman's getting his job back. I feel like Amendola has played better than Edelman the last 2 seasons, and obviously Edelman missed this season, but Amendola had 8.1 yards per target since 2016, Edelman 8.0. And I think Edelman's targets have sort of had a higher expected yardage totals, at least based on the model that I put together. And Edelman has dropped 7.7% of his targets over the last 2 years, where Amendola has only dropped 3.3%. I feel like Edelman may be showing some signs of decline. He's going to be 32 years old next season. That's the same year that Wes Welker started to see his yardage totals go down dramatically. Amendola's not any younger, but I haven't really seen any signs statistically that he's performing worse than he has at his peak seasons. So I guess I would just ask how confident you are that Edelman is going to be their guy in that role next season. I feel like Amendola might be a sneaky player to look for, even in dynasty formats where he might be freely available.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, you never know with the Patriots because they seem to always be one step ahead of everybody else. So, but look, you make all very good points, especially about Edelman, meaning if he's getting up there in age and he's been, injured with some pretty significant injuries himself. Look, this isn't a case of Gronk where Gronk's just far and away better than everyone, so you kind of deal with it. If anything, the Patriots have shown they could, drop any guy into that slot role, or not any guy, but guys you wouldn't normally see in that role and do very well with it. So who knows? I mean, Amendola is a free agent, but it's very possible they bring him back on some super team-friendly deal. And then, look, they don't miss a beat. They can let go of Edelman or drop him or relegate him to the bench even and turn that over to Amendola. So, who knows? But it's not unreasonable to expect Amendola to do well again next year, even if it's not in New England. I mean, look, he stuck around. I remember when he was kind of a darling of the Hard Knocks series, I think when they were on Dallas or the Rams or one of those. And look, he parlayed that into a couple decent deals too. So, no, it's very possible. And look, he's done very well when the Patriots were counting on him, and that could buy him some time. So now it conflicts with my super deep stash of Riley McCarron from a couple weeks ago, but I'll let that go.
Yeah, I think you can own both. I think they're probably both available for you to pick up.
Right.
All right, Mike. Well, I think that's going to wrap up today's episode. So thanks everybody that's been listening to this, the Dynasty Slant. It's going to be 2 weeks again before we do another episode. So everyone enjoy your Super Bowl. But after it ends, remember, we're going to be doing Dynasty episodes throughout the offseason. So you'll never have to go too far to get your football fix from the two of us. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.